So before this video even gets started, let me get something out of the way. There's nothing broken with the Spurs as an organization. They've been the most consistently successful NBA franchise of the last 20 years and arguably across any of the 4 major American sports leagues. So the title of this video and the content that comes after is not meant to imply any kind of disrespect toward the Spurs as a whole. And with that said, these are just my thoughts on how they could possibly turn this team around. Now, with that out of the way, the Spurs aren't necessarily at rock bottom at the moment. They still have plenty of young players and pieces moving forward, but this right now, this Spurs team in terms of how well they're playing, as well as their future outlook, is about as bad as it's been for them over the last 2 decades. And honestly, the reason that they're here, and one of the only reasons that they are where they are, is because they just didn't anticipate the whole Kawhi Leonard trade request thing to go down the way that it did. The last time that he was fully healthy and happy on this team, they were one of the best teams in the Western Conference and were probably going to challenge for a championship, but then everything hit the fan and suddenly he didn't want to be in San Antonio anymore. And so it isn't necessarily their fault that they're at this point, because I'm not sure that really anybody could have anticipated that, and whose fault that situation was is really still up in the air at this point. But with all those things said, let's just go ahead and review where the Spurs are at right now. So when you look at their long-term salaries, they don't really have anything long-term. Everything either expires in 2021, is a rookie contract, or is the new DeJounte Murray extension, at least in terms of their current roster as of this video. And on top of that, they have a group of 5 young players that are either good right now or could potentially be good down the road, in Murray and Derek White and Lonnie Walker and Keldon Johnson and Luka Samanic. So those are definitely some positives for them looking towards the future. They have the salary flexibility to make some moves, and they have some young pieces that they can probably depend on. But the biggest question for this team moving forward is by far what they're going to do with their 2 best players, those being DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge. DeRozan has a player option for this offseason that he's likely to decline just given the free agency climate of the summer of 2020, which would make him a free agent, and Aldridge's contract runs through the summer of 2021. So there are 3 things to consider here in terms of the Aldridge-DeRozan part of this whole equation. First is, do they want to move on from one or both of them? Second is, if they do want to move on from them, when do they choose to do that? And 3, what kind of trade packages would they be looking for? And the answer to those 3 questions is going to decide what kind of roster this team has moving forward and what kind of rebuild they undergo, because I think it's pretty clear at this point that there need to be changes to the roster, but how they handle the DeRozan and Aldridge situation is going to determine what kind of roster they have going forward. Now, if they keep both of them or trade one or both of them for just different win-now pieces, then that would extend their competitive life as a team currently, while Greg Popovich is still the coach, and that certainly is an option. But to me, really the only real one, if you're looking at making this team a championship contender in the long term, is to trade away both LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan right now. And there's a couple of reasons for, 1, why I would want to trade them away, and 2, why I think right now is a good time. In terms of why I would right now, there just doesn't appear to be a lot of real difference makers on the trade market at the moment. So if you're offering up 2 borderline all-star caliber players, teams are going to jump at that opportunity because there's about 5 to 7 teams in the league right now that are legitimate contenders, and getting either of these guys could certainly move the needle for them. And then moving forward beyond this season, the 2020 free agency class doesn't look all that great. So if you're going to add a player of significance, then this trade deadline is probably going to be a better opportunity to do that than in free agency. The other part of the timing of this is if one of these players suffers a significant injury, which is becoming increasingly likely as they get older, then their trade value is completely shot immediately, and that is a huge blow to the future plans for the Spurs. And then the last part is just, why would you wait? It's not like this team is a real threat at the top of the Western Conference. They could always turn things around this season and end up being a playoff team, but nobody's really worried about this version of the Spurs in terms of making the conference finals or the finals. So what really is the point of waiting around for these guys' contracts to run out when you can trade them for value now? So the question, of course, is where exactly could these guys potentially get traded to? Well, for DeRozan, I would focus on teams like the Magic that need an all-star caliber guard to raise their ceiling and have some assets to trade that could interest the Spurs. For example, they could potentially get a package of Aaron Gordon and Khem Birch to make the salaries work in exchange for DeRozan, giving themselves a nice young front court player to build around that's under contract for the next couple of seasons in exchange for the free agent to be DeRozan. Alternatively, there are also teams like the Nuggets that could be potentially looking to make moves like this to raise their ceiling, but don't expect too much if you're a Spurs fan in exchange for DeRozan, simply because of his status as an upcoming free agent. The Magic or the Nuggets or teams like that are not going to want to give up a ton for a player that they're not sure they're going to be able to retain in the offseason, but there is still value to be had in return for DeRozan at this trade deadline. For Aldridge, on the other hand, things are a little bit trickier because most teams just don't need front court help as much as they do in the backcourt, unless it's a really good floor spacer, and Aldridge can do some of that, but is known more for his post-game and mid-range shooting ability. However, a team like the Miami Heat could certainly use what Aldridge provides. They need a bit of scoring punch in the front court and could view Justice Winslow as expendable because he needs the ball to be most effective, and they already have guys like Jimmy Butler and Goran Dragic. For example, the Spurs could end up getting Justice Winslow and Myers Leonard to make the salary work in exchange for Aldridge, pairing Winslow with Gordon as another nice young player under contract for the next couple of seasons to build around, along with their incumbent group of 5 young players that I talked about in the beginning of the video. For the Heat, adding Aldridge ensures that they have every kind of player in the front court that they could possibly need. They have Kelly Olynyk as a floor spacer, Aldridge as a go-to scorer, and Bam Adebayo as a do-it-all player on both ends of the floor, which would really bolster the front end of their lineup. So let's just say, for example, for the sake of argument, that the Spurs take both of these deals. Well, as I said, now they've got their core group of 5 guys that are young players on their roster currently. They add Winslow and Gordon to that group. They've got a lot of guys under contract over the next couple of seasons in terms of young guys, whether it be rookie contracts or the Murray extension or Gordon and Winslow being under contract, and they still will have plenty of payroll moving forward as well to make moves, whether that be in the trade market or in free agency. And when you compare that to where they're at right now as a team, I'm not really sure why there would be much of an argument against this, other than the fact that potentially this could mean the end of Greg Popovich as Spurs head coach. He could look at this and say, you know what, I don't really want to coach this team anymore. I don't really want to be a part of a rebuild. I think it's time to hang it up. And that would be a really unfortunate way for the Popovich era to end, but it doesn't really seem like it's going in all that positive of a direction at the moment anyway, so you might as well ensure the long-term future of your franchise. And on top of that, if the team wanted to take it even a step further, there are other veterans on this roster that they could potentially move for value as well. There's Patty Mills, there's Rudy Gay, there's DeMar Carroll. Even if someone like Jakob Poeltl is expendable to this team, to a team that needs front court depth, if they really wanted to tear everything down, there are pieces here that they could get future value for. However, I don't really think that they would do that because they would want to keep some semblance of a competitive team around for what could potentially be Greg Popovich's last season. I don't think they would just want to tear everything down completely and go into full tank mode or anything by trading away all these veterans, but still, trading away Aldridge and DeRozan would be the smart move to get significant future assets, and then maybe next year when some of these guys are on expiring contracts, they can trade away guys like Mills and Gay and Carroll. Now, having said that, it isn't completely out of the question that they just trade everybody, because Woj and Zach Lowe recently said that a rebuild is coming in San Antonio, which is kind of the instigator for this video. But they also mentioned that it could be coming this offseason rather than at this trade deadline. It could be either of those timelines, so maybe it'll be more so in the offseason for some of these other veteran guys than right now during the year. And from there for the Spurs, it's all about player development and drafting properly. And with their history, it really shouldn't be long before they have a solid young core with a much better future than what they have right now. And certainly, as I said, you could argue that there are other paths, like trading some of the young guys for another piece around Aldridge and DeRozan. And maybe, like I said, you could lose Popovich if you end up trading away these veterans, but this is still the best plan, in my opinion. And if this is the end of this Spurs run as we know it, it will be an absolutely historic and well-known and well-talked about one that will be really respected throughout the history of the NBA. But all good things do at some point have to come to an end. Some people were predicting that it would be this season. And again, maybe they'll turn some things around and they'll take a completely different path than the one that I've outlined in this video. But as of looking at their roster, their contract situation, their assets, and what could potentially be out there in return for Aldridge and DeRozan, this to me seems like by far the best possible path to fixing the San Antonio Spurs. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.